Good afternoon, everybody. Spectre here for another edition of Midnight Rider. Good to have you aboard for this edition. A little bit of an update here, midday here. A couple pieces now that I wanted to get to, and other odds and ends. Seems like the rhetoric, the inflammatory language, is certainly heating up. And one must ask the question, why? What is it that they are so deathly afraid of at this point? Why are they so scared of having any sort of dissenting opinion whatsoever? Doesn't matter if it's folks in Congress, whether it be House Representatives, whether it be senators, AOCs, you name it, or if it's the censorship going on via the Facebooks, the Twitters, and the like. So we're going to get into that here. And of course, the question about what would GW do? What would George Washington do? Talking about the insurrectionists from the day. We're going to touch upon that here momentarily, so stick around. We'll see you back here on the other side. Warning. These social media platforms may be hazardous to your health. Censorship kills. Pain coming. This has been a PSA by Breaking Spectre. Alright, like I said, welcome back everybody. A little bit to get to here this afternoon. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the inflammatory language, the rhetoric and that is certainly heating up. So with that being said, let's just get right into it and let this play through.
You know what? A bunch of bad people do, or a small amount actually, do a really bad thing, attack the Capitol, which I denounce and completely am against and don't agree with the violence. But yet Democrats who cheered on, supported, called peaceful protests, Antifa BLM riots the entire year long that caused billions of dollars worth of damage, attacked American businesses, burned down Minneapolis. Let's see, what else did they do? Then they supported bail bond links for criminals. You know what? Yeah, don't yell at people. You know what? You shouldn't bring COVID positive members in here, spreading COVID everywhere. Stop being a hypocrite. Yeah, this is how it is here now. This is how it is. Stop being a hypocrite. This is arguing with my Democrat colleagues, supposed colleagues. That's how it is. That's how it is now in America. So you're witnessing exactly what we're having to live through.
Isn't that crazy? Holy cow. Yeah, the divide is deep, and it's not going to get better. These people are absolutely unhinged. They have the reprobate mind at this point and have given themselves over to it, period. And we should not, in any sense, acquiesce or align ourselves with them. They're fools, as is said in the Bible. Nonetheless, she had this to say. Rep. Cori Bush is the leader of the St. Louis Black Lives Matter terrorist mob who trespassed into a gated neighborhood to threaten the lives of the McCloskeys. You remember the guy standing there with his AR and her with a handgun in hand as they breached their grounds and knocked down their iron fence? She is lying to you. She berated me. Maybe Rep. Bush didn't realize I was live on video, but I have the receipts. So again, and you also look at what has played out here over the last couple days as well. You had people like old McConnell come out and say yesterday that she's a cancer to the Republican Party. Yeah, a cancer. Why is that? Just because she thinks differently and she doesn't acquiesce and bend over to the Dems like McConnell does? Such a fraudulent huckster, folks. At the end of the day, there is no R versus D. There is only patriots and traitors, and I think we know who is on what side. That being said, continuing on here today, Sarah Carter had this, says Rep. Spire says Republicans should be called terrorists. Well, there you go. So the divide continues. Rep. Jackie Spire out of California said Dems should start labeling Republicans as terrorists in a tweet posted on Monday. Of course, mind you, at Jack and everybody doesn't see that as hate speech, now do they? And of course, they will still stand on at Jack's platform. The Republicans have been calling Dems the radical left. Time to start calling the Republicans the terrorist right, she wrote on Twitter. There you see said tweet there from February 1st. Spire's tweet received strong support on social media, including from One Tree Hill actress Sophia Bush, who replied, "It's Ben time." The Republican Party has become a deranged group of political fanatics, a Twitter user said in response to Spire. They've descended away from the principles of the Constitution and into political fanaticism. Their deranged fanaticism is dangerous, and it is making the domestic terrorist threat grow in our country. Oh, that is very, very interesting. So I guess you saints on the Dem side must follow the letter of the law to a T, do you not? Immoral pricks. Nonetheless, Jackie Spire says the Republicans have been calling Dems the radical left. Time to call Republicans the terrorist right. Gustavo says the Republican Party has become a deranged group of political fanatics, much the same as what we just covered. Another user replied, Trump Talibanners. How cute, yes. And of course, Spire's office didn't immediately respond to this reporter's request for comment. The story will be updated if and when a statement is received. So again, yes, the rhetoric is certainly high at this point. The inflammatory statements, the inflamed passions, as the Federalist Papers called out, if you go back to Federalist Paper number 10, talking about these who are of not sound mind, who are void of facts and reason. So again, folks, if you're on the side of the moral, hold the line, hold your head high at the end of the day, and know that justice will be coming. All right, that being said, let's get into the next article. This is an interesting article that came by way of Frank Meal over at Real Clear Politics today. It says, enemies of the state versus enemies of the people. I didn't declare war on the establishment. It declared war on me. It declared war on me when it supported energy policies that couldn't enrich Saudi Arabia and Russia and would cost me more money at the gas pump or on my power bill. Says it declared war on me when it told me my ideas weren't worthy of debate and discussion, or that they were even so dangerous they couldn't be shared publicly. It declared war on me when it used the police powers of the FBI and CIA to first spy on a presidential candidate and then work to undermine the administration of that candidate after he was elected. It declared war on me when it told me my religious beliefs did not deserve the protection of the First Amendment. It declared war on me when it told me boys could compete against girls in high school sports and that they could shower together afterwards. It declared war on me when it offered citizenship to illegal aliens and shipped American jobs to China. It declared war on me when it mocked the usefulness of a wall on the Mexican border and simultaneously put up a razor wire fence around the Capitol. It declared war on me when it tried to defund the police so that millions of Americans would be left defenseless against mobs from Antifa and Black Lives Matter. It declared war on me when it said America was never great. It declared war on me when it told me my children they are not good enough because they are white. It declared war on me when it said that defending the Constitution's rules or federal elections is sedition. It declared war on me when it told me that I was a domestic terrorist if I didn't believe the government's official pronouncements about elections, about free speech, and about right and wrong. Let's just say it plainly. The establishment declared war on me and on all conservative Americans when it decided that leftist orthodoxy was more important than the Constitution. Now think back to what the tweet just said a moment ago. Right. Who's the fanatics? Don't believe me? Fine. Why should you believe a Trump supporter? You've been indoctrinated by the national media, big tech oligarchs, the Democratic Party, and academic elites to believe without questioning that people like me can't be trusted. But you don't have to take my word for it. Listen instead to John Brennan, the former CIA liar director under President Obama, who speaks authoritatively for the deep state. He said on MSNBC that the members of the Biden team who have been nominated or have been appointed are now moving in laser-like fashion to try to uncover as much as they can about what looks very similar to insurgency movements that we've seen overseas, where they germinate in different parts of the country and they gain strength, and it brings together an unholy alliance, frequently of religious extremists, authoritarians, fascists, bigots, racists, nativists, even libertarians. This guilt by labeling is the antithesis of fair play or justice. It is a convenient mechanism for the ruling class to herd people into identity clusters so that individual rights can be supplanted by group responsibility. If this reminds you of China's Cultural Revolution, you are not wrong. The ruling class wants you to conform, confirm, and comply. If you step outside the lines, be prepared to be shamed, silenced, and ostracized. A shocking example was provided Wednesday when Douglas Mackey of Delray Beach, Florida, was arrested for creating memes that allegedly misled voters in 2016 to think they could vote by texting instead of by actually going to the polls. This is the equivalent of arresting Sacha Baron Cohen for exposing the gullibility of the rich and famous. The FBI offered no evidence that Mackey actually convinced anyone not to vote, but even if it did, so what? Would you rather live in a country where the FBI is hunting down pranksters 4 years after the supposed transgression, or a country where voters are expected to be able to recognize a joke when they see one? But nothing can be taken for granted anymore. The people, and even their representatives and senators, are considered enemies of the state because they hold opinions that don't meet the standards of Joe Biden, or, this is even scarier, Jake Tapper. No wonder the people are starting to rise up and rebel against the plutocracy. It's not we, the oligarchs, who are the source of power in the Constitution, but we, the people. Yet the ruling establishment has forgotten that. If people like Donald Trump and Douglas Mackey are deemed to be enemies of the state, then those who would suppress them and their freedoms must be considered enemies of the people. A house divided against itself cannot long stand, but if there is to be a truce, it will not come from submission, but from a recognition that all people are created equal, that they all have certain inalienable rights, and among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those words were worth fighting for once. Are they worth fighting for today? I don't know, but I do know this. If Americans can't have liberty, we can't have America either. At least not one that is distinguishable from China. The time has come to make a choice. And isn't it funny, too, that the 1776 report was immediately taken down upon entry of Biden into the White House on quote-unquote Infraduation Day, or Inauguration Day if you prefer. If you recall, having gone through that in its entirety, which you can still find on the channel and various locations I have my content here, go back and take a listen and understand exactly what their playbook is that we know and have been aware of for oh so long. The tired old D-Party con playbook. The whole projection of the crimes that they do are being projected onto those who have not. And of course, the identity politics, the BS and the shenanigans that go contrary-wise to the Constitution, stating exactly what he just highlights here, that all men are created equal under their Creator. But they don't believe in a Creator, right? So at the end of the day, they are not a moral body of folks who care nothing about a sheet of paper and the words written on it. However, those of us who do will stand upon it. That being said, let's get into the last piece here. There's a little bit to this thing. This is a piece called How George Washington Responded to Insurrectionists. This was by T.J. Martinelli via the 10th Amendment Center recently. It says the recent protests and storming of the U.S. Capitol building on January 6 produced a hysterical reaction for both pundits and the federal government. This contrasts wildly with the response to an actual rebellion during the Republic's early days. The new federal government didn't respond to the so-called Whiskey Rebellion with crackdowns on civil liberties to prevent another rebellion, as many seem to want to do today. In 1794 Kentucky and Pennsylvania, farmers took up arms in opposition to a federal whiskey excise tax. The Whiskey Rebellion concluded with President George Washington calling up the militia to suppress the rebels, who dispersed before any real fighting occurred. And there we see pictures there. It says interpretations of the rebellion vary. Some view Washington's decision as a vital move to preserve the then fledgling federal government's legitimacy, after Shays' rebellion 8 years prior had prompted the founders to replace the Articles of Confederation in favor of a stronger central government. However, others consider the rebels as patriots resisting an unjust tax on whiskey, which was frequently used as a means of exchange in frontier areas where coinage was scarce. To be sure, Washington reacted initially in a manner utterly restrained compared to what we would expect today. Even after invoking the Militia Act of 1792, allowing him to call up state militiamen, he sent state officials to the rebels and tried to reach a peaceful resolution, without success. However, a separate issue to look at is the aftermath of the rebellion. Roughly 150 men were arrested and tried for treason, yet only 2 men were found guilty, and they were later pardoned by Washington himself. In his 7th State of the Union address, Washington defended his decision. For though I shall always think it a sacred duty to exercise with firmness and energy the constitutional powers with which I am vested, yet it appears to me no less consistent with the public good than it is with my personal feelings to mingle in the operations of government every degree of moderation and tenderness which the national justice, dignity, and safety may permit. As historian Carol Birkin noted in a 2017 lecture, not a single person really ever served a jail term. Everybody was given amnesty. Nobody was cruelly beaten or destroyed. But the power, the authority of the federal government was upheld. And I'll flash over to that here briefly. This is way too long to play here, but just want to give you the opening couple minutes of this.
National Constitution Center. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tom Donnelly. I'm our Senior Fellow for Constitutional Studies here, and I'm absolutely delighted to join you this afternoon to welcome back prize-winning historian, great friend of the center, Carol Birkin. Her book here, A Sovereign People, I can't recommend it more highly. What's so really amazing about it is it features so many of the founders that we care deeply about. You have George Washington, John Adams, Alexander Hamilton, Madison, Jefferson. They're all in here. But we fast forward past the point of the Revolution and the Constitutional Convention. And instead, Professor Birkin shows how they wrestle in the 1790s to try to create a new republic under our Constitution. And so walks us through these amazing episodes like the Whiskey Rebellion, the XYZ affair, the controversy over the Alien and Sedition Acts. You can get a sense of both the rise of early American politics, but also the way in which these people who had so many divisions tried to come together and build a single American project together. So we're gonna discuss that here, but please do pick up the book downstairs, and there'll be a signing after the show. But first, a little business. Just want to plug a few of our upcoming programs. On June 8th, the evening of June 8th, we're going to have a film screening of the HBO documentary The Loving Story, which is a celebration of the 50th anniversary of Loving v. Virginia, which struck down state bans on interracial marriage. And you will get popcorn and concessions with your ticket to that. We'll also have a cash bar, so it should be a wonderful constitutional evening. So please join us for that. Also, next month, we're going to be tackling the future of Congress with leading scholars and reporters. It should be a great conversation. with our president, Jeff Rosen. And then we'll also have programs on George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. So both a hero of the first founding and a hero of America's second founding. So great programming coming up. If you want to check out the full schedule, we have them outside, the hard copies, or check it out on constitutioncenter.org/debate. But now just to give a formal welcome here for Professor Birkin. Carol Birkin is the Presidential Professor of History Emerita at the City University of New York Graduate Center and Baruch College. She's the author of many acclaimed books and is here today again to discuss her new book, A Sovereign People, The Crises of the 1790s and the Birth of American Nationalism. Again, book sale and signing downstairs after this, but please join me in welcoming Carol Birkin. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So this is, again, as I said in my introduction, and I mean it sincerely, just a terrific book, terrific read. I learned so much about this period in history. I'd like to begin where you do in the book, which is with the image of an anxious George Washington taking over the presidency. Can you talk a little bit about where we were as a people in 1789 and what George Washington and his colleagues were concerned about down the road?
Well, we weren't yet actually a people. We were Marylanders and Georgians and New Yorkers and Connecticut people. There was not yet really a sense of a unified nation. Men like Washington and Hamilton and at the time Madison wrote the Constitution in part to try to forge a national identity, and in fact to take away some of the power the states had, which was all of the power at the time, and transfer that to a we the people government. There had been extraordinary opposition to this, as some of you may know. The anti-federalists were probably outnumbered the federalists, that is the people who supported the Constitution, and only great good luck in many of the conventions got the Constitution passed. Washington knew.
All right, well, this is going to go on for a little while. I'll go ahead and drop the link to the article. You guys can check this out. It is a good listen in case you want to get a little bit of history behind the scenes. Flashing back to the article, though, continues on with this. It says, perhaps Washington and other founders holding office realized the appearance of hypocrisy for condemning men as traitors who acted as they had just a few decades earlier. Who else has hypocrisy that knows no bounds in this day and age? Exactly. At the same time, it's not so much that Washington and Congress did as what they didn't do or even proposed to do. Reading through diaries, letters, and correspondence from founders ranging from George Washington and Alexander Hamilton to Thomas Jefferson, written during the rebellion, there is no instance I could find in which they advocated or suggested the civil rights restrictions such as firearms ownership or freedom of speech and assembly. There was no call for a permanent standing army. This is on top of the fact that nothing was actually proposed and then enacted. In fact, Jefferson wrote sympathetically of the rebellion in a December 28, 1794 letter to John Adams, calling the whiskey tax an infernal one. The first error was to admit it by the Constitution. He further wrote that hatred of the law in those states was universal and has now associated to it a detestation of the government, and that separation, which perhaps was a very distant and problematic event, is now near and certain and determined in the mind of every man. So I'm going to quick flash over to that letter. This was the letter Thomas Jefferson to Madison, December 28, 1794, the works of Thomas Jefferson in 12 volumes, Federal Edition, collected and edited by Paul Leicester Ford, to James Madison, at the time, Monticello, December 28, 1794. It says, Dear Sir, I have kept Mr. J's letter a post or two, with an intention of considering attentively the observation it contains. but I have really now so little stomach for anything of that kind that I have not resolution enough even to endeavor to understand the observations. I therefore return the letter, not to delay your answer to it, and beg you in answering for yourself to assure him of my respects and thankful acceptance of Chalmers' treatise, which I do not possess. And if you possess yourself of the scope of his reasoning, make any answer to it you please for me. If it had been on the rotation of my crops, I would have answered myself, lengthily perhaps, but certainly congisto. The denunciation of the democratic societies is one of the extraordinary acts of boldness of which we have seen so many from the fraction of monocrats. It is wonderful indeed that the President should have permitted himself to be the organ of such an attack on the freedom of discussion, the freedom of writing, printing, and publishing. It must be a matter of rare curiosity to get at the modifications of these rights proposed by them, and to see what line their ingenuity would draw between democratical societies, whose avowed object is the nourishment of the republican principles of our Constitution, and the society of the Cincinnati, a self-created one, carving out for itself hereditary distinctions, lowering over our Constitution eternally, meeting together in all parts of the Union, periodically with closed doors, accumulating a capital in their separate treasury, corresponding secretly and regularly, and of which society the very persons denouncing the Democrats are themselves the fathers, founders, and high officers. Their sight must be perfectly dazzled by the glittering of crowns and coronets, not to see the extravagance of the proposition to suppress the friends of general freedom, while those who wish to confine that freedom to the few are permitted to go on in their principles and practices. I here put out of sight the persons whose misbehavior has been taken advantage of to slander the friends of popular rights, and I am happy to observe that as far as the circle of my observation and information extends, everybody has lost sight of them, and views the abstract attempt on their natural and constitutional rights in all its nakedness. I have never heard or heard of a single expression or opinion which did not condemn it as an inexcusable aggression. And with respect to the transactions against the excise law, it appears to me that you are all swept away in the torrent of governmental opinions, or that we do not know what these transactions have been. We know of none which, according to the definitions of law, have been anything more than riotous. There was indeed a meeting to consult about a separation, but to consult any question does not amount to a determination of that question in the affirmative, still less to the acting on such a determination. But we shall see, I suppose, what the court lawyers and courtly judges and would-be ambassadors will make of it. The excise law is an infernal one. The first error was to admit it by the Constitution, the second to act on that admission, the third and last will be to make it the instrument of dismembering the Union, and setting us all afloat to choose which part of it we will adhere to. The information of our militia, returned from westward, is uniform, that though the people there let them pass quietly, they were objects of their laughter, not of their fear, that 1,000 men could have cut off their whole force in 1,000 places of the Allegheny, that their detestation of the excise law is universal, and has now associated to it a detestation of the government, and that separation which, perhaps, was a very distant and problematical event, is now near, and certain, and determined in the mind of every man. I expected to have seen some justification of arming one part of the society against another, of declaring a civil war the moment before the meeting of that body, which has the sole right of declaring war, of being so patient of the kicks and scoffs of our enemies, and rising at a feather against our friends, of adding 1,000,000 to the public debt and deriding us with recommendations to pay it if we can. But the part of the speech which was to be taken as a justification of the armament reminded me of Parson Saunders' demonstration, why minus into minus make plus. After a parcel of shreds of stuff from Aesop's Fables and Tom Thumb, he jumps all at once into his ergo, minus multiplied into minus makes plus. just so the 15,000 men enter after the fables in the speech. However, the time is coming, and we shall fetch up the leeway of our vessel. The changes in your house, I see, are going to be going on for the better, and even the Augean herd over your heads are slowly purging off their impurities. Hold on, then, my dear friend, that we may not shipwreck in the meanwhile. I do not see in the minds of those with whom I converse a greater affliction than the fear of your retirement, but this must not be, unless to a more splendid and a more efficacious post. There I should rejoice to see you. I hope I may say I shall rejoice to see you. I have long had much in my mind to say to you on that subject, but double delicacies have kept me silent. I ought perhaps to say, while I would not give up my own retirement for the empire of the universe, how I can justify wishing one whose happiness I have so much at heart as yours to take the front of the battle, which is fighting for my security. This would be easy enough to be done, but not at the heel of a lengthy epistle. So there is the letter there. Continuing on with the article, it says, not surprisingly, Jefferson would later repeal the excise tax when elected president. Even Federalists like Alexander Hamilton, in ways, sought to avoid violence that might have demonstrated the power of the new government, albeit he did advocate hanging some of the rebel leaders. In an August 29, 1794 letter to Maryland Governor Thomas Lee, he wrote of avoiding the necessity of using force now and at future periods by keeping the militia deployed in good morale. So here we have that letter. It says, from Alexander Hamilton to Thomas Sim Lee, from the 29th of August, 1794. To Thomas Sim Lee, dear sir, we have received by the last Pittsburgh mail advices which give a hope that the disturbances there may terminate without bloodshed. Yet the symptoms thus far are too equivocal to be relied upon, and may be a mere trick to produce a relaxation of efforts. Hence, the President has concluded to proceed as if they might prove fallacious. I thought this hint might not be unacceptable to you. It is very important in its example and consequence that even if the militia are not to be a zeal for the support of government, should appear amongst them, and may save the necessity of using force now and at future periods. With great respect and esteem, I have the honor to be Dr. Sir, your obed, Sir Alexander Hamilton, His Excellency Governor Lee, Maryland. And so back to the article, we find in all the correspondence Hamilton had with George Washington, not one advocated for the confiscation of firearms from the regions where the rebellion had occurred, nor was there a call to restrict firearm ownership of any type among the general population to prevent similar rebellions in the future. The federal government didn't use the crisis as an excuse to enlarge itself, as some sought with Alien and Sedition Acts passed 4 years later. While Washington's best opportunity to make himself a military dictator occurred just after the War of Independence ended, with him still in charge of the Continental Army, the Whiskey Rebellion theoretically could have afforded him another chance, one that he likely never even contemplated. The comparatively restrained response by Washington to the rebellion demonstrated that it is not necessary to take away liberties to maintain civil order or, quote-unquote, keep us safe. Writing in reaction to Shays' rebellion, Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter to James Madison saying, rebellions were a medicine necessary for the sound health of government, and that honest Republican governors should be so mild in their punishment of rebellions as not to discourage them too much. So over to that letter. It says, a little rebellion, quotation, societies exist under 3 forms sufficiently distinguishable. 1. Without government, as among our Indians. 2. Under governments wherein the will of every one has a just influence, as is the case in England in a slight degree, and in our states in a great one. 3. Under governments of force, as is the case in all other monarchies and in most of the other republics. To have an idea of the curse of existence under these last, they must be seen. It is a government of wolves over sheep, It is a problem, not clear in my mind that the first condition is not the best, but I believe it to be inconsistent with any great degree of population. The second state has a great deal of good in it. The mass of mankind under that enjoys a precious degree of liberty and happiness. It has its evils too, the principal of which is the turbulence to which it is subject. But weigh this against the oppressions of monarchy, and it becomes nothing. Mello periculism libertatum quam quietum servitudem. Even this evil is productive of good. It prevents the degeneracy of government and nourishes a general attention to the public affairs. I hold it that a little rebellion now and then is a good thing, and as necessary in the political world as storms in the physical. Unsuccessful rebellions, indeed, generally establish the encroachments on the rights of the people which have produced them. An observation of this truth should render honest Republican governors so mild in their punishment of rebellions as not to discourage them too much. It is a medicine necessary for the sound health of government. That was Thomas Jefferson to James Madison in Paris, January 30th, 1787. Continuing back to the article, says what many people fail to grasp is that rebellions and insurrections aren't always found in physical confrontations, and the medicine necessary for the sound health of government can be applied just as effectively through the nullification of unconstitutional federal acts. Incidentally, Jefferson referred to nullification as the rightful remedy. The histrionic and totalitarian rhetoric coming from the federal government today over a handful of people storming the U.S. Capitol demonstrates how fragile its perceived legitimacy is today. It is a government that overreacts to minor incidents because deep down its members are terrified of any meaningful defiance or resistance to their rule. They realize how easily D.C. tyranny could end if the American people were united in common opposition to unconstitutional actions in a manner that reduced their power, rather than give the largest government in the world the further pretext to expand it. So, there you have it. Very interesting read, and I think it's a rightful read, including the letters and so forth. Again, when this broadcasts here, I will drop the link out there. You guys can check out the almost hour-long piece there of the video on that I played just for a little bit there. But nonetheless, this is where we are at, folks. The inflamed rhetoric, things heating up. We've got the impending quote-unquote sham impeachment coming up on the 9th. All the garbage net left over from what took place on January 6th, and all of its ridiculousness. We know that the single article put forth is ridiculous on the surface, not factual in the least, timelines way jacked up, and a lot of circumstantial evidence and things of that nature that have yet to even make their way to any sort of committees before Congress whatsoever, all overlooked, all unconstitutional, all bogus BS. So that's what I'm going to leave you with here for this episode. Again, just a short piece here for the afternoon. Get your minds wrapped around this for a little bit. We'll see you back here shortly on the next one. Take care. God bless everybody.